My brother teased and humiliated my girlfriend at a wedding. At a wedding, my parents defended him. Now he's in prison for domestic violence. The second Victoria, 25F, my girlfriend walked in. Samuel instantly started behaving inappropriately, making her deeply uncomfortable with his totally inappropriate actions. He practically pushed our mom out of the way to be the first to hug Victoria, holding on way too long until she had to physically step back. Throughout dinner, he kept finding excuses to touch her arm or shoulder, telling these fake inside jokes that made no sense since they just met. And literally shoving past me multiple times to sit next to her, until he completely crossed the line by trying to feed her from his own fork while making intense eye contact. Victoria was obviously uncomfortable but kept being polite since it was our first family gathering, and she wanted to make a good impression. The whole evening, Samuel kept bringing up embarrassing stories about me from childhood, twisting them to make me look like a pathetic fool. He told this completely fabricated story about how he had to save my high school girlfriend from my alleged emotional abuse, which never happened. Victoria knew these stories weren't true because I'd already told her about my teenage years, but my parents just sat there nodding along like Samuel was telling gospel truth. After dinner, things got even worse. Victoria offered to help clean up, trying to be helpful. I was helping my dad move some boxes in the garage when I realized I hadn't seen Victoria for a while. I found her in the kitchen with Samuel literally blocking her path to the door. He had her cornered by the sink, and was telling her how she deserved someone more exciting than his boring, unstable older brother. He was standing way too close and had his hand on the counter next to her hip. Victoria had already told him to back off twice by the time I walked in. When she saw me, she looked relieved, and immediately came to stand by me. Samuel just laughed it off like it was all some big joke, but I could feel Victoria trembling. My girlfriend Victoria and I have been together for 8 months, and everything was absolutely perfect, until Samuel decided to completely wreck our lives with his obsessive behavior. I guess I need to provide some background about our family dynamic for this to make sense. Samuel and I grew up in an upper-middle-class family in a small town in Minnesota. Our parents both work in real estate and make good money, but they've always been more focused on maintaining appearances than actual family relationships. Samuel was born when I was 3, and from the moment he arrived, he became the center of our parents' universe. Nothing he did was ever wrong, and somehow everything was always my fault. Growing up, Samuel showed some really concerning behavior that my parents completely ignored. When he was 6, he deliberately broke my gaming console because I wouldn't let him play when he wanted to. Instead of punishing him, my parents bought him his own, and told me I should have shared better. When he was 12, he killed my pet hamster by feeding it chocolate, knowing it was toxic. But my parents said it was an accident, and that I shouldn't have kept pets if I wasn't going to watch them properly. In high school, he spread rumors about me cheating on my girlfriend at the time, which caused us to break up. My parents said he was just being protective of her. This pattern has continued into our adult years. Samuel still lives at home with our parents, working at my dad's real estate office and basically doing whatever he wants. He sabotaged every relationship I've tried to have. With my last girlfriend before Victoria, he convinced her family that I had a gambling addiction, completely false. Before that, he told another girlfriend that I had cheated on all my previous girlfriends, also false. Each time my parents either defended his actions or accused me of exaggerating. When I met Victoria, I decided to do things differently. I kept our relationship completely secret from my family for the first 3 months, because I wanted to protect her from Samuel's usual tactics. Victoria is honestly the best thing that's ever happened to me. She's brilliant, compassionate, and works as a pediatric nurse at our local hospital. We met in the hospital cafe where I was getting coffee while visiting a coworker who had surgery. She was on her lunch break, and we started talking about the horrible hospital coffee. After a few more coffee chats, we started dating, and everything just felt right. Victoria knows all about my family history because I wanted her to be prepared. She was actually the one who encouraged me to try introducing her to them, saying that maybe things would be different now that we're all adults. She's always trying to see the best in people, which is one of the things I love about her. I finally agreed to introduce Victoria to my family at a dinner party last month, and that's when everything started falling apart. The real problem started a few days after the dinner. Victoria began getting strange calls and texts from numbers she didn't recognize. At first it was just heavy breathing or immediate hang-ups when she answered. Then they started leaving increasingly creepy voicemails calling her stuck up and frigid for rejecting a better option. Some messages mentioned specific details about her work schedule and what she was wearing that day, proving someone was watching her. Victoria didn't make the connection at first, but I recognized some of the voices as Samuel's old friends from high school. This group of guys who still hang around with him and basically do whatever he says because his parents give him money to throw around. When Victoria blocked those numbers, they just started calling from new ones. Then Samuel's friends began showing up at the hospital, pretending to be visitors but just hanging around the pediatric ward where Victoria works. They would stare at her for hours, making comments just loud enough for her to hear. Last week, one of them followed her to her car after her night shift. She was so scared she called me crying from her car, too afraid to drive home in case they were following her. I had to go pick her up and drive her car home while my friend followed in his car to make sure we weren't being tailed. Victoria has started having panic attacks before her shifts, and her coworkers have noticed something's wrong. Yesterday, I finally had enough proof to confront Samuel directly. I had recordings of the voicemails, screenshots of the texts, and security camera footage from the hospital showing his friend stalking Victoria. I went to our parents' house where Samuel still lives and showed him everything. He just sat there with this smug smirk on his face while I talked, then looked me dead in the eyes and said he had no idea what I was talking about. But maybe if Victoria wasn't such a stuck-up bitch, people wouldn't feel the need to teach her a lesson. Something in me snapped when he said that, and I punched him in the face. Samuel immediately started wailing like I'd tried to kill him, even though it was barely a bloody nose. Our parents came running in, and of course, they completely lost it at me, not at Samuel. They didn't even look at the evidence I was trying to show them. Mom was hysterical about her baby boy being attacked, while Dad was screaming about how I've always been jealous of Samuel, and need professional help for my anger issues. Everything that's happening? Any advice would be appreciated because I'm at my wit's end here. Update 1 first, I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. Reading all your responses helped me realize how serious the situation really is, and Victoria and I have been trying to follow the advice many of you gave about documenting everything and taking legal action. Unfortunately, things have only gotten worse over the past 2 weeks, and I need to vent about what's been happening. We followed the advice about going to the police. Victoria and I spent hours compiling evidence, screenshots of all the threatening texts, recordings of the voicemails, and security footage from the hospital showing Samuel's friends lurking around. We also had written statements from 3 of Victoria's coworkers who witnessed the stalking behavior. The police officer we spoke to seemed concerned at first, especially about the workplace harassment, but then everything got complicated. It turns out Samuel's best friend Tyler, one of the main guys involved in harassing Victoria, is the son of a local police sergeant. When we mentioned Tyler's name, the officer's whole attitude changed. He started saying that without direct proof that Samuel was orchestrating everything, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested that maybe Victoria was misinterpreting friendly attention from guys who were just hanging around the hospital for legitimate reasons. He even had the nerve to ask if Victoria might have encouraged their attention somehow. We asked to speak to a different officer, preferably a female officer, but they gave us the runaround. Eventually they said they would issue warnings to the people we could identify from the security footage, but that was the most they could do without concrete evidence of actual threats. It felt like a complete waste of time. My parents' reaction was even worse than I expected. The day after we went to the police, Samuel showed up at their house with a black eye, claiming I had attacked him again. I hadn't even seen him since the night I punched him 2 weeks ago, but of course, my parents immediately believed him. My mom called me crying hysterically about how I was out of control and trying to destroy Samuel's life. She said that going to the police proved I was deliberately trying to ruin his future over a silly misunderstanding. Then my dad called. He was furious. He threatened to cut me off financially, which would have been scary if I still depended on them. Thankfully, I have a good job in software development and my own apartment. He also threatened to fire me from the family real estate business, forgetting that I've never actually worked there. That's Samuel's job. It really showed how they don't even see me as my own person, just as an extension of Samuel's life. The real disaster happened last weekend. My mom kept calling and texting, saying they wanted to fix things as a family. She promised that Samuel was sorry about everything, and wanted to apologize to both me and Victoria. She said they had talked to him about boundaries, and he understood he had been inappropriate. After talking it over with Victoria, we decided to give them one chance to make things right. That was a huge mistake. We arrived at my parents' house for what was supposed to be a family dinner to patch things up. As soon as we walked in, I knew something was wrong. The house was full of people, my parents, Samuel, our aunt and uncle who always take Samuel's side, and worst of all, Tyler and 2 other guys who had been stalking Victoria at work. My mom called it a family intervention. For 2 hours, they all took turns attacking Victoria's character, while Samuel sat there looking smug. My mom went on this long rant about how Victoria was obviously jealous of Samuel's good looks and success, and had been flirting with him at dinner that first night. She said Victoria was making up the harassment because she felt guilty about leading Samuel on, and was trying to cover her tracks. My aunt suggested that Victoria was probably used to getting attention from guys at work, and had misinterpreted friendly behavior as stalking, because she had a guilty conscience. Samuel played his part perfectly, acting all sad and confused about why Victoria would make up such horrible lies about him. He kept saying things like how much he had looked forward to having a sister-in-law, and how hurt he was that she would try to turn me against him. Tyler and his friends backed him up, swearing they had only gone to the hospital because they were visiting Tyler's sick grandmother, who apparently moves between different floors and departments every day. The worst part was when they started questioning Victoria's mental stability. They brought up how she sometimes works night shifts, suggesting that maybe sleep deprivation was making her paranoid. They talked about how stressful it must be working with sick children, implying that maybe she was projecting her work stress onto innocent interactions with Samuel and his friends. My mom even had the audacity to recommend a therapist who could help Victoria work through her tendency to create drama. Victoria tried to defend herself at first, calmly explaining the harassment and showing them the texts and voicemails again. But they talked over her, dismissed her evidence as misunderstandings, or suggested she had somehow provoked everything. When Tyler started describing in detail what Victoria had been wearing on specific days at work, proving he had been stalking her, my parents acted like this was evidence that Victoria had been trying to attract attention. It all became too much when they invited Tyler and his friends to join us for dessert. Saying they wanted to show us what nice young men they really were, Victoria started having trouble breathing and had to leave the room. When I tried to go after her, my mom grabbed my arm and said it was time for me to choose between my real family and a girl who was obviously unstable and trying to cause problems. I chose Victoria. We left immediately, and I haven't spoken to my family since that night. Samuel's friends have gotten bolder with their harassment, now spreading rumors at Victoria's workplace about her being mentally unstable and having a history of making false accusations. Her supervisor called her in for a meeting yesterday to discuss concerns about workplace drama. Even though he seemed sympathetic, he warned her that all the disruption was starting to affect her job performance and suggested she might want to consider transferring to a different department or hospital. We've hired a lawyer who is helping us pursue restraining orders, but it's a slow process. Victoria has been looking into positions at other hospitals, and one of her former colleagues has offered to help her get a job at a hospital in a city about 300 miles away. I hate that we're being forced to consider such drastic measures, but I can't stand seeing Victoria so scared and stressed all the time. She cries before every shift now, and she's lost weight because she's too anxious to eat properly. I just don't know what to do anymore. Every attempt to handle this reasonably has backfired. My family is completely delusional, the police are useless, and it feels like Samuel is winning.